Sophie, can you come and join us on stage as well?
You can have the middle one.
Sophie, I'd like to ask you as well, because you've made a career out of collaborative storytelling, often co-directing with the characters in your film. And I'd like to ask you about this working relationship and how it came to be, who approached who.
Well, we have a mutual friend and editor called Jim Scott, who finished putting this film together for us, who's in the audience, who introduced us way back when, because Dunstan wanted to do a Kickstarter campaign to make this film, and I'd done a Kickstarter campaign before for another film that I'd done that had worked, and we met, and he told me all about the band, and he told me all about the story he wanted to tell. And I told him that I wasn't just going to help him raise some money. I would make the film with him if that's the way we were going to go, because I loved the sound of it, and that's how it all, that's how it began. And then we just started on this long journey that we've been on for the last few years.
Incredible. The film's about so many things. It's about music, it's about identity, it's about community, but it's also about reminiscence and memory. And Dunstan, I'd like to ask you about your emotional trajectory whilst making the film, getting in touch with old friends and tapping into that the early days of the band and how you felt whilst creating the film. It must have been quite an emotional journey.
What I found, the very first thing we ever did was, I think she's gone actually, was the very first thing we did was like film with Alice, that ironing scene, and that was just meant to be like something for the Kickstarter campaign. But obviously she was so brilliant in that interview that it just really it gets two scenes in the film, and Alice in particular and Harry, I suppose, were the two members of the band who like sort of really helped the whole process and were really willing to be a part of it, and that just meant. That meant, a lot to me. It was like really important that I had the blessing of the band to actually, make the film. Because I think it's funny when we showed the band the film, one of the things that people from the band said was that they were sort of relieved that it was my story, and it wasn't me trying to tell the whole story of Chumbawamba from everyone's perspective. And I think that was really important for us, that it became more about me than anyone else. That it became, because that was my experience. It was my experience, and I couldn't speak for everybody else in the band, I suppose. And so that was really important for me. It's funny because I was sat next to Maeve, who used to be in Chumbawamba, and there's three drone shots in it, and he gasped with delight when he saw his shots, and it was just brilliant that he was also willing, to help in the making of the film. So it was also brilliant. We actually, just to talk about Maeve again, we actually filmed a different ending before we filmed this one, and we had to get up at like 5 o'clock in the morning to film this scene on Ilkley Moor that was going to be the ending of the film. But Maeve was so fucking grumpy about the whole thing that it didn't really work. It was just like, it was really. I mean, the most nervous I ever was just before we showed the rest of the band, the film, because that was really important to me that they approved or gave their blessing, I suppose, to the film. So that meant a lot. That meant a lot to me, really.
I'd like to ask about the politics of the band as well. I mean, politics is always rife with hypocrisy, but I'd like to ask, looking back now, you kind of became sort of pigeonholed as this political band more than anything, and people always wanted to talk about the politics around it and the anarchism. In retrospect, do you think that took away from the music, and would you like to have portrayed yourself differently if you could change things and go back again?
Oh no, I wouldn't change. I wouldn't change anything about it. No. I mean, we had a brilliant time. you know, in all those years, you know, even before Tub Thumping, you know, like it was, you know, it was an amazing, you know, it was an amazing journey that we went on, and we were existing quite nicely as a band prior to that, and you know, like, and it was, obviously we never set out to have a, you know, have a hit single or anything like that, and yeah, and we had always, you know, we'd always express politics in our music. I mean, there's loads of stuff that you don't really get about the band that you don't really get a sense of, like stuff we were doing in the 90s around, you know, homophobia and about, you know, racism and stuff like that, that, you know, singles we brought out around those sort of topics. So we were always doing stuff that was political. So, I mean, it's like what Sean Forbes says, that thing about, oh, you did all these songs that were all really political, then you do one song that's just about drinking. And, you know, we had no control over that, obviously. But, you know, we jumped at the opportunity to do something, you know, in that situation where we suddenly found ourselves, you know, right in the, as Assaeus was, right in the belly of the beast. And that was an amazing, you know, that was an amazing journey in itself. You know, it was brilliant. I mean, I look back at some of the archive and think, God, it was a bit, you know, like, I mean, I think Alice is absolute. Every time Alice comes on the screen, she's just amazing, you know, and she was brilliant at dealing with the media in a way that I wasn't, or anybody else in the band wasn't as good as she was. She was just incredible at it. But that was, you know, that was her role. We were like a sort of band who all had, you know, particular roles within the, you know, within the organisation, you know, and it was a collective and that. So, and that was really, you know, that was all really important to us.
There's a great moment in the film where you're outside the squat in Leeds. And I think, Sophie, you notice the resident coming back, and you think, oh, it's a great opportunity to go into the house and go through, and you walk through the old rooms, and all that memory comes back. I'd like to ask if there was another moment in the film that stood out for you in the process of making it that was similar to that, like a moment that just kind of changed the direction of the film for a moment.
Well, when Babyhead turned up, that kind of changed a lot of the direction of the film. No, I mean, I never knew where this, I feel like I just followed Dunstan for a few years on this adventure, and the more I learnt about Chumbawamba, the more I understood that you could never predict, their whole ethos was never to be predictable. And so that's the kind of ethos we took for the film. So every corner we turned was pretty memorable and a bit of a surprise, because we didn't really, there was not much planning. It was sort of quite instinctive. So there's a lot of moments like that.
We were having a discussion just today or yesterday about how did we come up with the idea of Babyhead, and when did we start filming with Babyhead, and we couldn't remember, could we? We couldn't remember how it started. But then he just became a bigger and bigger character within the film, and we realised that he was just like a really good tool to use, you know, to help tell the story, and sort of ask all those questions and say all those things that everybody is sort of thinking, you know, as they're watching the film. I think he's like, he sort of bursts bubbles all the way through, you know, and he's just like, but that was like, we can't remember you know, how he became such a big part of it, but you know, he obviously, you know, he's like a massive character in the whole film, isn't he? He's like a big part of it, and it wouldn't be the film it was if he wasn't in it. It's funny, you know, like, because there are some documentary purists who don't like the fact that, you know, you invent a character like that to tell the story, but you know, for us it was like it was always about, you know, trying to tell the story in the most entertaining way we could, and I think Chumbawamba always poked fun at themselves all the time, and always, you know, tried to find the humour and stuff, and were always sort of like quite self-aware about what we were doing. And I think Babyhead is a continuation of that idea as well.
I'd like to take a question from the audience now. Someone would like to know if you found yourself again with Interrobang, and how the new musical journey is going. Yeah, I mean, that was sort of like quite a brilliant. You know, when me and Griff talked about doing it at first, you know, it took quite a while for us to get it off the ground, and it was only when Harry got involved that it really took off. Because of our age and that, and because, you know, the one thing or another, it's been quite a slow process. But we sort of like had a hiatus for a while, you know, like it sort of petered out a little bit. But it's funny because I sent the film to Griff,
to see if he was okay with it, and whether he liked it and stuff like that, and he did, and it's sort of it was really brilliant, because it sort of made us want to start that journey again in a way, and start doing stuff again together. Like I miss doing that. I think when I got back up on stage doing Interrobang, I thought, why did I ever stop doing this? This is something that I know how to do it, and I can perform on stage. I know what to do, and all that all that sort of stuff. And I just felt as though it was a really good way of talking about stuff as well, because I'm not very good at being part of like political organisations or doing stuff with other like I don't know, just in big groups of people and that. But being in a band is a really good way for me to like express how I feel and do something creative at the same time and engage with other people. And I think that's really important. I think there's people who are a lot better at doing all those other things, and that's not. I don't think that's my role, but I think I know how to do a certain thing that I've learned over the years how to do it.
Great.
And I really enjoy it.
Yeah.
I am actually a massive show-off. I could stand up here for hours just like trying. What is it? What am I? A narcissistic, a self-aware narcissist or something?
Obviously, it's a hugely personal film. And Sophie, I'd like to ask, was there a learning curve for you stepping into the film and co-directing? Did you feel like you had to learn these relationships and learn these new characters at such a big part of Dunstan's life, or was that something that just happened in the process of making the film?
I think it just happened in the I mean, I learned a lot. I was the reason I wanted to come on board with the film is because I was really envious that this amazing group of friends had lived in a squat and lived all these years together and done so much stuff. I grew up in the Midlands, just a pretty normal average life, and I was looking from the outside, very envious of it. So I was sort of living vicariously through their story about 30 years too late. But it was, it was, I learnt a lot. I learnt a lot about not giving a shit, about rebellion, about not having to toe the line, about taking risks, about making a film that we had no idea we still don't have any idea where it might end up, but really making a film that, it's Dunstan's personal story. It was if you're going to make a film about your life, you're only going to do it once, so you've got to do it in the way that makes you really happy. So yeah, I learnt a lot.
So I might make another one, actually.
Good. Well, good luck with that.
What was brilliant about? I mean, Soph was saying before we did all this, was saying this thing about lots of people don't like if you co-direct. It's not like, how does that work and all sorts of stuff like that. What was absolutely brilliant about co-directing with Sophie is that she always brought this different perspective to what we were doing. So if I would think something was incredibly important or incredibly funny in that, and she would just be like, no, that's just an in-joke. Nobody outside of you 8 in the band would ever understand that, or that doesn't really, or something that doesn't really matter. That doesn't really help the the narrative arc, really. It just doesn't work. So that process was, that having Sophie there all the time was absolutely vital, because this film would be nothing like this if I'd just made it by myself. I couldn't have made it without Sophie, basically. So, and I suppose you couldn't have made it without me, I suppose.
I'd like to take another question for the audience. Dunstan, I presume this is aimed at you. What does anarchy mean to you? And how would you define your political views, and how have they changed? I sort of like, I was never good at reading, like political tracts, but I think when we all lived in Southview together, and we were getting sort of completely subsumed in that world, I think we just found a way of working. So I think the most important thing for us at that time was about how we worked together, and we were a collective, and we shared responsibility, and we shared
You know, we shared money, we shared absolutely everything, you know, within that. And it was finding a way, you know, where you could live in such a way that, you know, we were sort of vegans before it was sort of before it was a thing, you know, back in the 80s, where all you could eat was TVP mince, and that was about it. And so it meant that process of learning how to find a way of living together has always, you know, stayed with me. And with that came, you know, we learned what was brilliant about that as well is that you pick up stuff from everybody else in the, you know, like in the house. So somebody would bring some, some Dadaist thing in, and you would read that, and then somebody would say that you've got to see this film, and we would watch that, and then somebody said you have to listen to this music, and you would listen to that, and it was just all this like, it was this big hodgepodge of ideas that all just like came together in one big melange, I suppose. So it was a really brilliant, baptism of sort of fire of us all living together and working out what our politics was. I suppose in the 80s it was quite straightforward because you just hated, you hated Thatcher, and we all hated Thatcher. We all were involved in the miners' strike in the 80s, and we just developed our politics as one, and I don't think we necessarily all thought exactly the same thing. So if you asked any member at Chumbawamba, they would probably have a completely different view of what anarchism meant to them. And so to me, it was a lot about, situationism and Guy Debord and stuff like that. That was sort of, and Dadaism, those were the sort of things, maybe the things that I was interested in. Maybe Alice was sort of more like, she was all over class politics in a really sort of informed way, and we all had sort of different views on, but we found a way of all working together. And I think it was the working together thing that was in actual fact the most rewarding thing for the whole thing. Of course, we didn't change the world. It's still a fucking shit show. But we find ways. You still find the cracks, wherever they are, to try and exist, outside of the norm. Or you find people with similar views or similar ideas and ways of working. So you have little victories still, I think. And I suppose I see the film as a little victory in a way, and it expresses an idea to people of my generation that I don't think you hear that often. I don't think you hear that idea. And what I liked about the whole journey that me and Sophie went on with the film is that I ended up finding a lot of my inspiration from a younger generation who were coming through. So there's that whole section where there's bands like Petrol Girls and Dream Nails and stuff like that, and Downtown Boys who were sort of doing stuff that just was like, wow, that's brilliant. There's this whole new movement of people who were doing stuff, and that was really important to me, that we expressed that idea. And at the other end of the spectrum, obviously, there's people like Ken Loach, who's in his 80s now, and he's still doing political stuff. And I think that was an important thing, that you could see right across the spectrum of ages, that you could still do something.
Well, what a film. Thank you so much for sharing it with us, and thank you so much for sharing your insights with us as well.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Thank you.